there was no allegation in that specific indictment of any contact between, or any witting contact between an American citizen, be it Trump campaign or not, and anybody in the Russian government, which is, pretty significant. The claim there from the president often is that there is no collusion, and it increasingly looks like the special counsel is about to prove that. But, a lot of people are criticizing the president, saying he hasn't been, he's not serious about countering the Russian threat. They're upset with him for not implementing aggressive sanctions. And there's been a lot of goalposts moving because people are now saying, oh, well, the president's been proven wrong, because it definitively shows that there has been Russian meddling in the 2016 election, which he did deny at certain points, or at least questioned at certain points. But the White House has changed their stance on that recently. So that's kind of what's going through the president's head. He's been tweeting a lot and giving us a lot of insight into his mind. Just 10 minutes ago, he tweeted about why he was questioning why former President Obama actually didn't do more to hit back against the Russians, which is a question a lot of us are asking, given this indictment.
Yeah, Saager, this is one of my things with the whole Russia investigation, and I'm actually willing, I'm perfectly willing, if there were any guilt or anything that was found that showed that the president colluded or was paying Russians or doing, any of that stuff that would be illegal, I would be perfectly willing to say, well, that's wrong, and I wonder what the legal prescription for that is. I'm not in any way so partial to him that I'm willing to excuse wrongdoing, especially the kind that would, kind of dance around with treason, working with foreign governments to try to make changes to our country before he's elected to the presidency. But what I'm seeing with 13 indictments of Russians and the things that are coming forward, it doesn't seem like he had anything to do with it. Even the stuff that is kind of the peripheral type things that have to do with some of the people who worked for him during the campaign season, none of it seems to rise to the level of them actually impacting the election or seeking to do that.
Right. Yeah. So that's part of the interesting, what I was mentioning about goalposts. So the president has been very adamant here. The Trump campaign had no witting contact with members of the Russian government. The only thing that could possibly bear out on that front, it looks like, is that at one point, foreign policy volunteer advisor George Papadopoulos, right, who did apparently brag to an Australian official that he allegedly had some connection with the Russian government. And the FBI is investigating that, and Mr. Papadopoulos, we assume, is cooperating with the special counsel, and we'll hear more about that later. But exactly as you said, nobody in the Trump campaign, and the special counsel's been working on this for over a year, and Mr. Mueller has found absolutely nothing, at least, that we know about there. And so part of the problem here is that some in the media are so desperate to take a swipe at the president is that they're saying that the mere fact that the special counsel has proven Russian interference is itself really an indictment of him and his claims against the collusion narrative. And so there's a lot of goalposts moving towards, okay, well, there was no collusion, but it shows Russian interference, so that's why it shows that the president is wrong. And, it's pretty typical partisan games up here.
So when can we expect, and I know you're a White House correspondent, you don't have a crystal ball or anything, but I really appreciate, your perspective, especially since you're with the Daily Caller. And I know what that means. You're in the White House, you're the Daily Caller correspondent. So I put a lot of, I'm into what you have to say, but I'm just wondering what your feeling is. Do you feel like we're getting close to the end? Are we 75% of the way done? Like, I'm just ready to move on from this, because if there were criminality, you know how it is when there's criminality, they don't wait a second. Once they have enough evidence, they come out like a lion and they're like, these are the indictments and this is what we're going to do. And we're forwarding this over to, a prosecutor. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And Congress has to be alerted. There are hearings, briefings, etc. We still, I haven't heard hide nor peep of any of that serious stuff about the president. So are we done? Are we close to done?
Yeah. So, the White House has been telling us for a while that, the end is near. A lot of the officials have spoken. Apparently, the special counsel would like to interview the president. They're advising him not to do that, from what we can tell. And so we'll see, how that works out. My guess would be it's probably sometime in the next 6 to 8 months. It all depends on, because remember too, the former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort is under indictment for, crimes totally outside the purview of what he was doing with the Trump campaign. It has a lot more to do with his very shady dealings and lobbying on behalf of the Russians between like 2020 and 2014. So that trial has to occur. And these trials take a lot of time. There's, tens of millions of dollars of asset, investigations, et cetera, et cetera. So that could take a really long time. And nobody really knows if that's the end or the beginning there. But then in terms of, with the president and this probe and like how far it goes, part of the problem is that the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, whenever he wrote the authorization for the special counsel, he said any and all crimes that were to come under your purview or those that you discover, which essentially gives Mr. Mueller a blank check. That's kind of how he went after Paul Manafort for, violations of the Foreign Agent Representation Act, when it didn't really have anything to do with, the Russian government or collusion or his former associate, Mr. Gates. So a lot of the criticism from Republican leaders is that the mandate for the special counsel is too broad, is that his purpose was to determine whether there was collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russian government, and the answer increasingly appears to be no. So, we'll see how long that goes. But if I had to guess, I would say 6 to 8 months on that question.
Jeez, 6 to 8 months? That feels like an eternity.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, all right. Well, so let's move on a little bit. I'm loath to bring it up, but it is where we are right now, which is the shooting. And I played a little bit of audio in the first segment from Representative Scalise, and he was talking about, he used the term unicorn laws, which is awesome because I also have used, similar terminology to kind of describe this obsession with passing another law when murdering people at schools is already illegal. Murdering people in general is illegal. Shooting people with guns, illegal. So you really, there are no ways that you can say, oh, this is a part of the law that, slipped through the crack. This isn't illegal. All these things are already illegal. So why would passing new laws stop kids who are upset and hurting and depressed and they've been bullied and their lives are spiraling out of control? Their whole life is a dumpster fire. How do any new laws prevent those kids from going out and doing what this kid did? But yet that's where we are.
Yeah, so the president, I think he shares exactly your thought process there. And so he's holding a listening session with high school students and teachers on Wednesdays and Thursdays this week. And the other thing is he's in discussion right now with Senator John Cornyn. So Cornyn actually has some really interesting legislation right now, and it's called the Fix NICS Act. And it's about strengthening the gun background check system because there were some failures within the background check system that led to the ability of the Texas church shooter to be able to buy a gun. So this is a much more realistic, bipartisan effort that the president can spearhead and that can show that he's actually doing something to address gun violence rather than, as you said, unicorn laws. There's so many calls out there, and everyone's saying, do something. And it's like, well, what exactly, are you going to be doing? What is something that can pass 60-vote margin in the United States Senate, the House of Representatives, and to be signed by the president? And there's very little specificity here. And some of us suspect that the reason for that is because do something to many people, especially Democratic lawmakers or at least pundits, is that they frankly just want to repeal the Second Amendment or take away people's guns, which is obviously not something that's politically or constitutionally acceptable. So I think that the president shares a lot of what you're saying there, and in his view, the best action that they can take is to just strengthen and enforce the laws that are currently on the books. Because if those laws had been properly put into place, if proper safety procedures had been followed at Parkland High School, then possibly we wouldn't be in this tragedy. I saw something pretty interesting from a member of the school board down there who was saying that 3 years ago, Broward County appropriated $800 million for protective barriers and to implement a single point of entry system, and that almost 100 out of 200 schools in the county have still not even been assessed to begin putting those barriers in. So, and the Parkland High School was actually one of those schools that did not have a single point of entry system, which could have possibly prevented this tragedy. So there's a lot of things here which aren't gun control, which can actually contribute to school safety. And I think the president's definitely going to be taking a look at that.
Oh, wow. I hope so, because so that's disturbing to me. I actually, little bit of trivia here. I used to be an elected school board official, and I remember, of course, while I was on school board for those 3.5 years, it was we had school shootings that happened across the country, and during that time, we actually strengthened our safety procedures and added in some different, basically the single point of entry, the lockable classroom doors with the bulletproof glass,
right.
The single mirror. It's like a little window, the narrow, almost bookend window, which is a safety feature. The heavier doors. We did all of that. And we did it with operating funds, so we didn't have to go to the voters to get more money. We just said, where are we on maintaining our boilers? How many boilers do we have left? Well, we'll just divert funds from maintaining that boiler, and then when it comes up, maybe it'll be at its end of life, and we'll just replace it. And it was like once we decided we were going to do it, we did it. It's disturbing to me that high school didn't take those actions, because we're talking about 17 dead people because they didn't say, there's only one way in and out of this building, and he knew that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the thing is, Stacy, is the voters already voted for the money. They voted to appropriate $800 million. It's just that the incompetence of the bureaucracy here is it's taken over 3 years, and there's still not assessments or plans to even put into place the single point of entry system. These are exactly the types of things that security professionals will tell you is what you can implement to, at least significantly diminish loss of life or prevent altogether. And, we haven't even talked about what happened with the FBI, right? I mean, several different tips to the FBI that they admit that they failed to investigate in the background of this shooter, and that possibly could have turned the tide as well.
And the 2 trips to the FBI, or 2 tips, I should say. Two tips saying, hey, this guy seems like he's, unhinged, and the FBI dropped the ball on that one, this is a repetitive activity with the FBI. And I'm in no way like an anti-FBI or anti-CIA person. I think our legacy organizations do a fantastic job, but we now see a pattern from the Pulse nightclub to there's another shooting that happened in between there, and then this one. So 3 instances of them saying they're told this person, it should be a person of interest to you, and that person goes on to kill people, and then later they're like, oh yeah, the FBI was alerted. How does Christopher Wray still have a job right now?
Yeah, well, I mean, Christopher Wray's defenders would say he's only been in the job for about 6 months, and so this isn't necessarily on him. What this really is about, it's an institutional problem. And, the FBI's defenders, some rightfully so, say, look, these are only the people that you hear about. You don't know how many countless terrorists or shooters that we've stopped. And I say, okay, that's fair, but, that's not the margin that we judge you on. And I think it's our job in the press and in the public to really question how you failed to do something so basic as to follow up on what sounds like an extremely, credible tip. And this is something that we see time and time again, that we see with, various terrorists. The Boston bomber had contact with the FBI. Dylan Roof had contact with the FBI.
26.
I mean, I can go on and on with many terrorists. The Chelsea bomber had contact with the FBI.
Saager, we're up against the break, but you are awesome as always. Thank you so much for coming on, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. White House correspondent for the Daily Caller. Have a great afternoon, and we'll be back with more right after this.
Part of growing in Christ is learning how to encourage others. In doing so, you always gain strength for your own journey. It's kind of like you can't pray for someone in earnest and remain angry at them. You may not like what they've done, but the presence of God has a way of sifting the wrath right out of you. You can't encourage someone else in your walk and remain numb to the encouraging words yourself. As you encourage others, you begin to see that all things are possible in Christ Jesus. Your obstacles become visibly obtainable. In this world of self-centeredness and all about me, be extraordinary. Don't be the norm. Each day, stop and take a me poll to determine just where you are in your walk with the Lord. Encourage your brother or sister in the Lord in that area and watch God do some amazing things in your life. Your deliverance is resting in the power of your tongue. With a heart for the urban family, I'm today's urban woman, Tony Johnson. Connect with us at urbanfamilytalk.com.
It's time to call your senators. We need to tell them to put an end to the liberals' filibuster, switch to a majority vote, and defund Planned Parenthood. Call the Capitol Switchboard at 202-224-3121 or go to afaaction.net. Senators respond to constituent calls. So call 202-224-3121 and tell your senators to switch to a majority vote and defund Planned Parenthood. Your call will make a difference.
Is God calling you to pursue theological graduate education? What's keeping you from taking the first step? Is it time? What if you could choose from flexible class options? Is it money? What if competitively priced seminary offered academic scholarships? Do you think you're alone? What if your classmates were just like you, balancing careers and families with seminary? Hello, I'm Dr. John Nyhoff, president of Wesley Biblical Seminary in Jackson, Mississippi. Take the first step. Visit wbs.edu.
Yo, what up, Sid?
Yo, what's up, Mike? How you doing?
Man, I'm good, bro. Just left the club, the usual.
The club? Man, them clubs don't love back, man. You ain't learned yet. You better slow down, dude.
Ah, come on, Sid. You remember those days? We used to turn up together, man.
Used to, brother. I'm on something much different.
Like what, though? I mean, that Jesus music you be rapping about or beatboxing or whatever you be doing.
I'm saying, though, that's how I worship. God gave me rap, so I give it back.
Why, though? Gospel rap is boring, man.
Boring? There's nothing boring about the ransom that ransomed me with himself. Took me off the shelf to transform me into my best. Surrounding me with those of like minds. He drops bombs, some of which is found on urbanfamilytalk.com.
This is Stacy on the Right on Urban Family Talk.
But it does beg the question, how is it that these Russian operatives knew to focus on purple states like Michigan and Wisconsin, and your campaign didn't?
Well, of course, we spent a lot of time and energy and effort in all those states.
Hillary Clinton herself did not spend much time in those states.
We had Tim Kaine was there, Barack Obama was in, and she spent enormous time in Pennsylvania and Michigan.
Sure.
And we spent a lot of effort. We had more staff in Wisconsin than even President Obama had in 2012. But I think that begs the question. I think we focused on the places we thought were that were in contest.
Sorry. Am I supposed to feel bad for Tony Podesta getting grilled about the fact that Russians knew what states were battleground states, but the Clinton campaign did not? Now, mind you, he did point out that they did know that those states needed to be visited and that they sent Barack Obama and they sent her husband. And that's smart. Send somebody, for goodness sakes. But for him to get asked that, and if you watch the video, I already tweeted it out, so check it out. It's on the Facebook page. It's on my Twitter feed. He looks so uncomfortable. He's just like, his face is like, he almost looks like the way you look when someone asks you something and you're literally physically reacting to it. You're reaching, you're doing, we've all been there. You're uncomfortable. You realize you've been asked something that's totally, this is not your favorite question. And so he's trying to, oh, well, the reason why we did that was, we sent that other one. We sent that other guy. We sent Barack Obama. Barack Obama wasn't running, by the way. Barack Obama wasn't up for election. It was Hillary Clinton. So the fact that the Russians actually used targeted, campaigns on online social media and whatnot, so they wanted to impact the election. We meddle in the elections of other countries. They meddle in the elections of other countries. This is something that happens. The fact that it's so outrageously portentous right now, that it's the most important thing that's ever happened. And we have just people all over the spectrum, political commentators, everyone's so concerned. They're concerned because they lost. Now, there's a bit of sour grapes to it, but there's also a bit of incredulity. Like, I can't believe we lost to that guy. But you did lose to him. So get over it. Like, you act like there's so much there's just like this shock level to it that you still can't, and the concern for America. Were you concerned before? So the status of this country right now, obviously we've had bad times before. And one of the things that I feel like the Lord has been impressing on me through, our pastor at church, speakers at church, podcasts that I listen to, even the messages that I listen to on Christian radio, everyone's kind of saying, yeah, things are bad right now, but pump the brakes on this is the end of America. I mean, it very well may be. Let's face it, we don't know. But we used to have slavery as the law of the land. People were property at one point in this country. We used to have it so women were kind of like glorified property where when you married a man, he got paid money by your family and you kind of, you went on over there and he owned everything you owned. I mean, there've been bad times in this country before. Culturally, the degradation is an all-time high, and things that would have been so unthinkable decades ago are now the norm. But we've been through rough times before. So there's a certain place that we can get to where we almost make it seem like we don't believe that God is on the throne, that we don't believe that he can take care of us, that we don't believe that he can revive our land, that he can touch hearts and change minds, and that he can break the bonds that are currently kind of shackling not just us, but the kids. And I mean that when we see the kind of bondage that we're seeing with our children, the cutting, this is stuff that we don't understand. If you're in my age group, you hear that and you're like, why would you cut yourself? Like, what purpose does that serve? Why are these kids doing any of this stuff? And so there are huge segments of our society where these are not problems. We just have normal things going on with teenagers, families where they don't understand how a lot of kids are feeling right now. But if you look at the level of divorce in this country, and if you're divorced, I'm not attacking you. I'm just talking about the ramifications of that. The ramifications of it are that kids have these extended blended families. And while all of their friends may be in the same situation, so they're in environments where most of their classmates have blended families, and so it's not like they're sticking out like a sore thumb, it's normal. There's a certain level of stress that hits the children. And so this isn't about you going into a corner because you're divorced. And I mentioned that it's about us as adults. This is our world, the world that we create for these kids. So how do we deal with all of that? It takes some work. It takes some organization. It takes us admitting, look, we made this bed. Now we're all in it. So how do we make this the most comfy, warmest, softest, cushiest, cleanest bed we can work with? Or whatever the analogy is. The situations are what we made. So the idea, is I see this a lot on the left, they're like, well, this whole gun violence problem is the problem of the NRA. I had someone tell me that online. He was like, your Twitter feeds or your Twitter profile says you're an NRA member, and so there are dead kids in Florida right now because of you. Well, when the shooting was going on in Florida, I was right here in Missouri. And most NRA members, all of them, in fact, because the kid wasn't an NRA member, were going about their business when the shooting occurred, as is the case every time it occurs. So what's most convenient? Is it more convenient to talk about NRA members and some lobbying organization, National Rifle Association, and how they have blood on their hands? Yeah, that's easy. It's easy to say, look at those horrible NRA members and their lobbying organization that they pay $35 a year to. And, they get the periodicals and they clean their guns and they shoot their guns. It's easy to say they have blood on their hands. It's much more difficult to say, as a supporter of liberalism, progressivism, socialism, as a person who likes to dance around with communism, as a person who believes in moral relativity, as a person who routinely mocks Christians and their desire for higher morals, I'm going to say that maybe I've played a role in this. As a person who's a Christian who also believes that the Democrat Party is the place where I should be, instead of me looking at the Bible and saying, look, the Bible says that we are to cleave to the woman of our, it says, be satisfied, overjoyed with the breasts of the wife of your youth. So, sexual morality is a thing. God actually says in his word that when we sin otherwise, we sin on the outside of our bodies. But when we commit sexual immorality, we actually sin against ourselves and we defile the temple of the Holy Spirit. That is so unpopular to say. What we're supposed to say is, do you feel like a man today? Then you're a man. Do you feel like a woman today? Then you're a woman. Do you feel like mutilating your child's body because they're confused about their gender? Do you want to let your child mutilate their body? If you don't, you're going to lose custody of your kids. That's what these leftist states are doing. All of the things that are happening right now, later, we're going to get to see the fruit of it. Lots and lots of people who have gone back to their original genetic sex, but have voices that won't change back, that have faces that you can't feminize a face. You can't, once you've gone through puberty, the bone structure that you have, that's the bone structure that you have. People are going to experience the ramifications of the things, the decisions that we're making right now. And just in that moment, just as now, liberals will refuse to acknowledge that they are contributing to all of the pain and heartache that's just waiting. It's stored up and it's waiting. Think about the MGTOW movement. We've talked about that here on the show. MGTOW stands for Men Going Their Own Way. It's a response to the rabid feminism that has gripped this country. So much so that young men of today, millennial men, feel like there are no women out there for them because all of the women that they encounter are bossy and shrewd. I'm not talking about bossy like the cute little sign that says, I'm not bossy, I am the boss. I'm not talking about people who are bossy because, you know, they're women and they're in charge in their workplace and they're assertive. I'm talking about the kind of bossiness that means that a man can't disagree with a woman. These young men are literally saying, I'd rather just play video games and earn a living and live a simple life and never have to worry about a woman, me falling in love with her, having kids with her, building a life, her divorcing me. Over 80% of all the divorces in this country are initiated by women, by the way. Her becoming dissatisfied with me for some strange reason, divorcing me, taking my kids, taking 80% of what I've earned, 50% of my savings, and leaving me in a place where all I can afford to do is make child support payments and live in a hovel. So young men are saying, I'm going my own way. What do you think we're going to see in 20 years or so? Men writing books, I went my own way, or the deep regrets of going my own way with the MGTOW movement. There's only one caveat there, though, right? The caveat is that a man can become a father at any point in his life. So men who decide to join the MGTOW movement, who then later realize, I do want a family, I do want kids, they can marry, they can be 50. These men can be 50, 60, they can be 70. They can meet a woman, they're earning well, they're doing well, fall in love with her, she falls in love with him, they can have children at that point. You know who's hurt by rabid feminism and the MGTOW movement? Women. Because our ovaries start, the expiration date starts cranking on up at 35. It doesn't mean you can't have kids past then. It just means it's harder for you and you have higher risk of different things going on. And besides that, who wants to be still cranking out kids in their 40s and 50s? If you're doing that, God bless you. And you are an energetic person who, you know, I love to watch what you're doing. But this is another sign of our culture. We need more Jesus Christ. We need revival. So when we're talking about all these different phenomenon, I mean, MGTOW, if you've never watched the videos, I encourage you, first of all, language warning. A lot of the videos for MGTOW, these are young millennials, they're unchurched, and the way that they're talking is very much like they're talking to their own age group. So you have to kind of put up with that. But you can find videos about women discussing MGTOW and ripping into feminists for creating this monster. You can find the men talking about it. And what I've taken to encouraging young people that I encounter who it's what's so funny about it is they'll talk to anyone about it. Young people nowadays who are in the throes of this, should I be a hardcore feminist? Do I need to be a hardcore feminist? Am I going to experience a harder time finding a wife because of rabid feminism? Should I just go MGTOW? These young people are willing to talk about it with people who aren't in their age group. They're willing to turn it over because they're just trying to find their way. And so this is, again, we bear some responsibility here because we allowed feminism to grow out of its original mandate, which was simply looking for better conditions for women, more rights for women. It's now grown into this rabid hatred of men. and a desire to dominate them and lord over them and to make them miserable and to make them pay for some pseudo patriarchy. This is something we bear responsibility for. And so, I encourage people when I'm talking to them, I encourage them to remember that we serve a God who's bigger than any MGTOW movement. If you really want to be married and you really want to be consecrated in a relationship, worry about yourself. Make yourself that ideal partner for your future husband or your future wife by studying the word, getting your education, being responsible, have a personality, for goodness sakes. Don't only be about gaming and stuff like that. And then pray for the Lord to prepare your spouse. That person's out there. Pray for the Lord to prepare them and be ready for that encounter. And we do need to tell these kids this because there's a sense of fatality to it, don't you think? If you are a young man and you've gone to college and all of the women you encountered there were, majority just interested in having sex and being liberated as women, and they've already told you, when I graduate from college, I'm going after my career and I'm not planning on having my first kid until I'm almost 40. And you're a guy and you're thinking, well, I was just hoping to marry, the woman of my youth, fall in love with someone, get married, and have a family. Waiting until you're 40, what in the world do you do? Both of you are just working like demons and that's it for 10, 15 years, the first 10 years of your marriage or more? That doesn't sound attractive to men, and they are kind of repulsed by that. Men want to take care of women. And don't take my word for it. There are so many great authors out there who've written books about these dynamics between men and women. Modern writers who've written about the dynamic as it stands today. Suzanne Venker is one. If you have not read any of her books, it's a great time to get one of her books on audio through Audible and listen to it and get an idea of what this is all about. She's probably, in my opinion, the foremost expert on the MGTOW movement and marriage and how women can navigate this. I just encourage you, first of all, let's pray about it. Second of all, be real and talk to the young people in your life about it and encourage them to know that God is ultimately in control here. We can seek him out and he will bless us. And thirdly, this is all our responsibility. It's our doing because we're the adults in charge right now as this is all coming to fruition. So what are you going to do about it? Stand up. We need you. We need your voice. We need your courage right now. And we need your prayers. All right, we'll be back with hour 2 right after these messages. Stay there.
Urban Family Talk.
Secular progressives in the United States have worked to alter the very nature of our republic.
For the progressives, there are no longer any God-given natural rights.
AFA Executive Vice President Ed Vitagliano helps you understand the progressive threat to the American Republic. Get your copy of this powerful DVD from the AFA Cultural Institute at afastore.net.
Truth. Wisdom. Empowerment. Urban Family Talk. A ministry of the American Family Association.
This is American Family News. I'm Steve Jordahl. The Florida school shooter has made an appearance in a court in Broward County. Steve Harrigan is here with the latest.
A lot of people getting their first look at that suspected 19-year-old killer inside the courtroom live for the first time. This is something the defense did not want to happen. They were afraid he was going to be turned into a circus for the media. Instead, he came out in a red jumpsuit, shackled around the arms and around the legs. And just his body language seemed to speak quite a bit, looking down, making eye contact with nobody. Outside of the court appearance here, he is in solitary confinement. He's also on suicide watch. The head sheriff has said they have eyes on him at all times.
Kremlin officials are speaking out for the first time, dismissing the indictment against more than a dozen Russian nationals last Friday, saying there is not enough evidence. Fox's Amy Kellogg reports from London.
President Putin's spokesman Dmitry Peskov said, quote, "There are no indications the Russian state could be involved in this." The 13 are charged with interfering in the U.S. 2016 presidential election. The operation allegedly involved a Russian troll farm, fake social media accounts, and Russians impersonating Americans during the campaign. Right after the indictments came down Friday, Russia's foreign ministry spokeswoman responded in a Facebook post that read in part, quote, 13 people against the Special Services billion-dollar budgets, against intelligence and counterintelligence. It went on to say that the whole story was absurd. It's believed all 13 are probably in Russia and therefore won't be facing justice for this in the U.S. anytime soon. Amy Kellogg, Fox News.
An assisted suicide bill before the Wisconsin state legislature demonstrates that voters must be alert as they place politicians in office. Here's AFN's Charlie Butts.
Proponents of doctor-assisted suicide have again introduced a bill to legalize it, although it has little chance of success this session. Matt Sandy, legislative director of Pro-Life Wisconsin, says it is a scary piece of legislation for the state's physicians. Doctors who refuse on ethical or religious grounds could be forced out of the profession.
And so what that's saying is that if the doctor does not want to prescribe lethal medication, poison, to their patients, and if they refuse to transfer them to a physician who will, they can be charged with unprofessional conduct. They can be run out of business.
And that could mean revocation of their license. Sandy says there is another confusing section of the bill.
It says that a request for lethal medication does not constitute attempted suicide, and that taking the medication does not constitute suicide. So that's how schizophrenic these bills are.
What the death certificate would show as the cause of death would be the underlying fatal illness, which did not cause the death. The suicide did. But that won't be on the death certificate. Opponents of euthanasia are the majority in the legislature, but it could swing to the left, meaning Wisconsin voters need to be careful who they vote for and question candidates on their position. I'm Charlie Butts.
A convicted killer whose Supreme Court case changed the way juveniles are sentenced will spend more time behind bars. Fox News Radio's Jared Halpern has more from Washington.
A Louisiana parole board has denied Henry Montgomery release from prison. Montgomery has been in prison for more than 50 years for the deadly shooting of a sheriff's deputy in 1963. His Supreme Court case in 2016 struck down life without the possibility of parole sentences for teenagers convicted of murder, giving about 2,000 inmates the ability to argue for early release. Montgomery's parole hearing was his first chance at release since his conviction. In Washington, Jared Halpern, Fox News.
Services were held for two Westerville, Ohio police officers who were shot and killed responding to a 911 call related to a domestic dispute. Music and discussions of their sacrifices took place during the event honoring the two officers. They were 39-year-old Eric Joring and 54-year-old Anthony Morelli, and they were honored by the community members at St. Paul Catholic Church. At the vigil, plans to build a memorial in their honor were announced. Find more news and information online at onenewsnow.com. We're also on Twitter, Facebook, and the One News Now mobile app. For American Family News, I'm Steve Jordahl.
Some 2,000 years ago, the followers of the crucified Christ learned that he had risen from the grave. They quickly spread the word that Jesus was alive. It's good news that spread from one generation to the next, and now it's our turn. One way to tell this extraordinary news to others is by simply wearing and sharing our colorful He Lives Easter buttons. Get your pack of 10 today at afastore.net.
Welcome to Stacy on the Right with your host, Stacy Washington.
Life didn't start out too easy. You mentioned in the book that you grew up in Pinpoint, and then when you're in a home which didn't have water, it didn't have electricity. When the house burned down, you moved to Savannah, and conditions got worse. I think you write that in the winter of 1995, you remember being hungry. 1955.
Yeah, boy, I was doing fine in 1995.
1955, you were hungry without knowing when you would eat, and cold without knowing when you would be warm.
That's a horrible feeling. But you know, today I just get worn down. I was with a young woman who happened to be black in Kansas recently, and she said something really interesting. She said, I'm really tired of having to play the role of being black. I just want to go to school. And I think at some point we're going to be fatigued with everybody being a victim.
Okay, so you are just tuning into the program. Welcome, and welcome back to everybody else who's been on here. I have to say, nothing is as fun when it comes to politics and getting a bit of audio as it is to get to hear Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas when he chooses to, step outside of the confines of the court and speak a little bit about his life and his legacy and really just almost any subject. He's such a fascinating man. Welcome to Stacy on the Right here on Urban Family Talk and American Family Radio, AFR.net and urbanfamilytalk.com are the websites. 866-963-2037 if you want to call in and join the program. So what did he just say? Okay. Well, he just was talking about his childhood, and he says he's worn down by the victimhood culture. So he's just having this discussion, and so he's older, and he grew up during a time when, if things were rough, they were just rough, and you just dealt with it. And we've become so, I don't know how I don't want to be insulting because I know we mean our best by the way that we behave towards, trying to shield our children, trying to be as proactive as we can about ensuring that they have opportunities. We're doing our best. That we don't mean anything bad by it, but we're just softer now. And I know when I say we, I'm including myself in that, but there are people out there who really, they handle their adversity and things that happen to them. They're very, very matter of fact about it. They accept their circumstances and they work through them. And in a lot of ways, most of us do that. But there's also an element of almost, we view hardships as like, well, why does that have to be? We need to do something to stop that from happening to people. And in most of the cases, I can't change my mind. Like there's some things I think people just shouldn't have to go through. Sexual abuse, rape, having family members killed by illegal aliens or anyone really, any kind of murder, things like that. But there are kinds of hardships that people go through because of the circumstances that they're born into that if they're approached in the right way can make you stronger. And that is what he's talking about here. Now, he goes into a little bit more detail. It's Clarence Thomas, Supreme Court Justice. He's a Republican. He's married to Jenny Thomas, who is a delightful woman. I know her. I've met her many times before at a conference that happens here in St. Louis. And she's a really special person and really just so interesting and intelligent. She's brilliant. And so she's his wife. And so she has to put up with the kinds of things that are now par for the course for public figures, especially a Supreme Court justice, which is the rabid hate that comes, the death threats and the name calling that he has to experience because he happens to be a Republican. And so he goes on to talk about you play the hand you're dealt. And I thought this is some of the best audio ever. And I will sometimes save pieces that I play on the show. I'll text them to our kids, or I'll play them in the car. We're on our way somewhere and I'll be like, listen to this. You can make your phone go through the speakers. So I'll do that and I'll let them listen to it just to kind of expose them to some of the things that are being, just discussion of the day. And he says you play the hand you're dealt. If you think about that for a second, let it marinate into you, go into your brain. He's not talking about accepting it or saying it's right that I'm in this circumstance. He's just saying, look, he grew up poor. He grew up, no indoor plumbing. He grew up hungry. He grew up in ways that now it would just be unthinkable, and it is unthinkable. You think about your own family in that circumstance. You think there's no way I'd want to go through that. And why would you want to? But this is the way that he was born into this and he grew up this way. And instead of saying, oh, woe is me, I'm a victim, he just knew he had to get out of it, and the only way out of it was education. So here he is. He's finishing off this. It's a short clip all the way through. I split it into two. So we've got the one we just listened to, and then he's talking about you play the hand you're dealt in number 6.
When I was a kid, there were tons of people who were in really bad circumstances. My grandfather would not let us wallow in that. And as you could tell throughout this book, he's my hero. He is the single greatest human being I've ever met. with 9 months of education, but he never saw himself as a victim. He used to say that he was a motherless child. He never knew his father. His mother died when he was 7 or 8 years old. Of course, they didn't have birth certificates then, so he never knew quite how old he was. And then he was raised by his grandmother, who was a freed slave. Then she dies. And then he lives with an uncle who has 12 or 13 kids and who was a hard man. And yet he never complained. And he always said, he would have this saying when you'd want to whine or something. He said, you know, you have to play the hand you're dealt. He'd always said, in those days, blacks played bid whist a lot. And he'd say, you always have to play the hand you're dealt. If you're dealt a bad hand, you still have to play it. And when we would whine about things, if you look at the bust in my office that my wonderful wife had made for me when I went on the court, his favorite quote was, "Old man Kant is dead. I helped bury him." That is what I grew up with.
And so this makes me so let's come clean here, guys. I went to see the Black Panther last night. We went as a family, went to a late show here in St. Louis, bumped into a couple we haven't seen in just years and years and years, and they were marveling at how big the kids have gotten. And so the 5 of us went to go see this movie, and I actually was looking forward to it. I know there's a lot of hype around it, and some people have tried to make it into a political thing, but I went there as a fan of the Marvel franchise and someone who I find it fascinating that this was the first example of a superhero movie where the majority of the cast was black coming out of Hollywood, because they're the liberals. They're the ones who most often tolerate black people. And just in case you've never heard this before, my view on using the word tolerance to speak about how you deal with other people is that tolerance is a word that's often used. It's specifically used to describe the tolerances of metal wings on aircraft, the body of an aircraft, what tolerances it can withstand before the metal bends beyond, its usefulness or snaps and breaks into multiple pieces because it has exceeded the tolerance of that strength of metal. And so when I think about people experiencing me in an environment, I don't think about them tolerating me, because I could name off some medical procedures I've been through where they ask me, did you tolerate the procedure well? So they know it hurt. They know that I was in pain. They want to know if I was able to withstand the pain of the procedure. In other words, did they ameliorate the pain enough for me to be able to tolerate the procedure that I had to have? It wasn't a question of if I was having it. It was, when you have this, you will have this medication and it will help you to tolerate it. I can tell you right now, I would rather a person say to me, I don't want to be around you, or no, thank you, please don't come, than to have me come and tolerate me to the point of them almost feeling like they're going to snap and break or lose their composure because my presence is there. So the idea that liberals have taken the entire conversation surrounding how we treat people who we share a common heritage as Americans, we should not have to tolerate each other. We should be happy to be in each other's company, because you could be a citizen of some third world pit. Instead, you're a citizen of this country. So instead of tolerating each other, we ought to at least at the very minimum be saying, you know what? Happy to see you, because it's better to be here than anywhere else. Don't you think? As Christians, we should be more than tolerating each other, because we are all brothers and sisters in Christ. We're going to spend eternity with each other. When we think about it that way, it means, I may not want to have lunch with you or, spend a lot of time with you on the regular, but I definitely need to love you with the love of Christ, which means more than tolerating you, more than feeling like I'm going to snap and break emotionally or physically just at the sight of you. So now that we've covered that, you've got this movie, The Black Panther. And, the liberals in Hollywood, they're just totally virtue signaling and patting themselves on the back for making this movie with all of these black characters. But you know me, the first thing I noticed as we got into the film is that the Wakandans, so I'm not trying to spoil this for you. If you haven't seen it, maybe you don't want to listen to what I have to say, but suffice it to say, you'll still enjoy the movie after this discussion. So you've got the Wakandans. It's an African nation, a tiny little an African nation in the heart of the continent of Africa. And by all appearances, they're a third world country with nothing but agriculture and poverty, and they don't ship anything out of the country. It's just a terrible place by modern standards, not somewhere you want to vacation. But we've been introduced to the Black Panther through the other Marvel movies where he showed up and he was upset about a terror attack on the United Nations that ended up with his father being killed. And so we know they've got some kind of technology because he's wearing a suit that makes him impervious to bullets, and he can flip and he can fly, and he's also got some kind of claws. We find out that the original suppository of the special metal that the shield of Iron Man is made out of, that metal is actually, all of it is right there in the Wakandan country. And so they've mined it and harvested it, and it has exploded their technology. But instead of sharing that with the world, they've basically hidden themselves off. So they have an impervious border. They have a country that is almost 100%, like it's 100% Wakandans. No immigrants, no refugees, just Wakandans. Their technology is the most advanced on the planet, and they're able to keep all of this a secret through their technological advances. So we watch the film, and as they begin to describe the 5 tribes of Wakanda, one of them, so obviously the tribe that the king comes from is represented by the panther, and they call him the Black Panther. The other tribe that decided not to stay with them and be in the Wakandan, kind of little coalition of tribes is represented by a gorilla. Now, I have a problem with that. And I have a problem with it because to this day, you still have people who compare Black people to gorillas and monkeys and chimpanzees. This is a regular occurrence. It happens every day. If you tick somebody off and you're Black, the chances of them comparing you to a monkey are pretty high. We even sometimes can feel like, well, it's okay to compare those Black people to monkeys because they're Democrats. Now, I'm offended by all of that, and I'm sure many of you are. So this is not an accusation going out into the audience. I'm just describing to you my reaction when I noticed that one of the tribes is represented by a gorilla, and they use gorilla sounds to shut people up. Like one of their things when they enter into a space is to use gorilla sounds. So I didn't like that. What I did like was that the Brainiac, the kind of Q of the storyline, or Batman has, his butler who's like technologically savvy and he makes all the cool stuff, was the younger sister of the king. So it's this young Black woman, and she's like really, really super, super cute, and she's super into the technology, and she likes to make fun of her brother and make him experiment on the stuff, and then he gets thrown up against a wall. It was very, very cute. And that was awesome. So without giving spoilers, I thought the movie was well done and it was fun to watch. And there were parts of it that were sad because of the situation for Black America. But the saddest part about it is that when you leave that theater, this whole idea that there's a country out there that is technologically advanced and they've yet to share that with the world, and that it's an African-based country full of Black people, that's the fantasy of the movie. That's not real. And that's the part that sticks with you when you're walking out into the parking lot and getting ready to go on about your business. That's the sad part. So when we get back, we're going to have more. We're going to talk about Chuck Todd bringing up the voting record on guns with Bernie Sanders. Get your laughing muscles ready. We'll be right back with more after this. Stay there.
Hello everyone, I'm Tim Wildman, President of American Family Association and American Family Radio. We still have seats available for our September tours, Washington, D.C. and Williamsburg. Washington, D.C. and Mount Vernon, that's one tour. And then Williamsburg, Jamestown, and Yorktown, that is a separate tour. Now, we put them back to back so you can do both. If you're flying in from Texas or Montana or California or wherever you may be coming from, so that you can do those tours back to back with us if that's something you so choose to do. Now, Stephen McDowell of the Providence Foundation, will be with us all along the way as our historian. Stephen will add context, he'll answer questions, talk about the people, the places, the events that make up our early American history. So for more information on this Spiritual Heritage Tour, go to the website spiritualheritagetours.com. spiritualheritagetours.com for the September tour information.
Up next, Carol Swain with 2 minutes to think about it. From poverty to professor, from GED to PhD, a bold Christian speaking truth to power. Here's Carol with today's 2 minutes.
Hello, folks. So now we know, and probably it comes as no big surprise that what the president said was going on. There was a concerted effort originating at the very top of our intelligence community and the DNC to take down then candidate Donald Trump. And the witch hunt has continued. Through the recently released memo, we now have confirmation of dirty dealings between the Clinton campaign, the leadership of the FBI, and the Obama Justice Department, all of which were intertwined with Fusion GPS, British ex-spy Christopher Steele, and the now infamous dossier containing allegations of conspiracy and misconduct linking the Trump campaign with the Russian government. The dossier was at the heart of Robert Mueller's Russian investigation of Trump, which is still ongoing. The big takeaway from all of this mess is this. We don't care about the political leanings of our national security personnel. We should care when they leverage their positions in order to rig an election, attempting to subvert the democratic process because of a loathing of one of the candidates in an election. Having a plan B isn't just playing fast and loose with our republic, but it's subversion. There was a time when folks convicted of subversion met with the wrong end of a rope. Let's hope this bunch is at the end of theirs.
To learn more about Carol and the Carol Swain Foundation, visit carolmswain.net and make sure you follow her on Facebook at Professor Carol M. Swain and on Twitter at Carol M. Swain.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right on Urban Family Talk.
Let me move to the tragedy down in South Florida. After Newtown, you said if you pass the strongest gun control legislation tomorrow, I don't think it will have a profound effect on the tragedies we have seen. And Senator, you ended up voting for some of those reforms, gun control measures that you weren't 100% sure would solve all the problems. Where are you today? Do you think now?
Hey, Chuck, let's be very clear. Hey, Chuck, let's be very clear. I have a D- voting record from the NRA. I lost an election probably for Congress here in Vermont back in 1988 because I believe that we should not be selling or distributing assault weapons in this country. I am on record and have been for a very long time in saying we have got to significantly tighten up the background checks. We have to end the absurdity of the gun show loophole. 40% of the guns in this country are sold without any background checks. We have to deal with the straw man provision, which allows people to legally buy guns and then distribute it. We got to take on the NRA. And that is my view. And will do everything I can to. The tragedy that we saw in Parkland is unspeakable. And all over this country, parents are scared to death of what might happen when they send their kids to school. This problem is not going to be easily solved. Nobody has a magic solution. All right, but we have got to do everything we can to protect the children.
What does that mean?
Okay, welcome back to the show, everybody. Stacy Washington, host of Stacy on the Right. Call lines are open for you, 866-963-2037. UrbanFamilyTalk.com is the website. Take our poll about our conference. I believe that's still up. Listen, so we just heard him spout off a whole bunch of lies, and it's not okay. It's not okay to go on television and spout off lies that Americans will then pick up and repeat at work and believe lock, stock, and barrel. And even if you present them with evidence to the contrary, they're just convinced that because Bernie Sanders is like their granddad or looks like somebody who could have been their granddad on another day or if they were born to another family, then he's definitely telling the truth about things and everybody else is a liar. He lied there. 40% of the guns in this country are not purchased without a background check. Easily debunked. Second of all, there is no legal purchase of guns that you then transfer ownership to someone who is not permitted to own them. It is a federal crime to purchase a firearm in order to sell or pass on, gift, etc., transfer ownership to an individual who is a prohibited possessor. That makes you an illegal firearms dealer, and you're eligible for some serious jail time under federal law. And prosecutions for that are up 33% for the year of 2017 under Attorney General Jeff Sessions. Don't take my word for it. I wrote articles about it. Go to America's First Freedom, type my name in the search engine, and you'll see all the articles I wrote about a number of the topics that he just lied about. That's the first thing. The second thing is, a lot of parents in America are not terrified to send their kids to school today. These instances of people doing these shootings, a lot of the people in the community were aware that the person was troubled. In the case of Adam Lanza, the people in the community were aware that this kid was troubled. In this case of Nicholas Cruz, again, 30 trips by the police to their home since 2010. The boy was expelled from school. His father died 13 years ago, which is not in and of itself reason for people to be afraid of him. But when his mother passed away, he'd been expelled from school just before that. People knew he was troubled. He'd been turned into the FBI. You don't hear Bernie Sanders talking about tightening control over or oversight over the FBI. You don't hear Bernie Sanders saying, you know what? The FBI, someone at the FBI needs to be fired. Maybe it's not Christopher Wray, as our first guest of the program discussed. Maybe it's not him. Maybe we don't fire Christopher Wray, but there's somebody who's left over from that administration who should be held accountable for the lapse in judgment that resulted in this. And I'm glad to hear that the president is doing something proactive by listening to people, but I'm concerned that when we have these listening sessions where the president brings in people, they're not experts, they're emotionally involved in this situation, they're going to say, we want you to do something. We want you to do something. The urge to do something is usually the impetus. You can trace all kinds of problems back to somebody saying, oh, we have to do something. And then that's when the stupid starts. This isn't about not having enough laws. It's about not having adequate application of those laws, not having the laws enforced. That's the problem that we have. So, I think it's disturbing that Bernie Sanders is continually called upon to bring his little old self up onto the TV and spout off this garbage. And that regular Americans who, quite honestly, you got to have some kind of a radar about yourself for when people are lying to you. When you're being lied to, and I know we can all lie. We can lie to ourselves. We can convince ourselves that certain things are true or untrue. I'm not saying that every person should be 100%, accurate at telling when they're being lied to. But I can tell you, Bernie Sanders doesn't tell the truth. He's an advocate for a tax of 75% or more on people who earn more than $1 million a year. And guess what? He's worth $1 million. He's worth more than $1 million. He owns 3 homes. Why would someone who's into redistribution of wealth and socialism own 3 homes? Please help me understand. But you can't. It's not that I can't understand because I lack the comprehensive ability to, compute and work my way through this issue. There is no understanding someone who advocates for redistribution of wealth and for confiscation of other people's hard-earned money and assets, but then himself stores up money and assets for himself. There's just no explaining that, except to say that he's a charlatan. He deals in these platitudes and do nothing, know nothing, nonsensical statements because they placate the masses of people who've not taken the time to educate themselves on why it is that people are killing themselves to get into this country. They're not killing themselves to get in here because we practice socialism. It's the capitalism. Woohoo! Capitalism. That's what's bringing people here. The economic opportunities, the idea that they can show up here and have almost no skills, buy a car, rent a car, start driving for Uber, earn $70,000 a year minimum, really get, their financial house in order and start banging on all cylinders with whatever they're earning and buy a nicer car and then drive for Uber Black or Uber X. And now they're really making some money. They're also learning how to speak English. So these were interesting conversations I had when I was in the Uber. I I don't know how many Ubers the last couple of trips to Washington, D.C. And let me tell you, it was a total turnaround from the cabs I took in Las Vegas. Oh, my goodness. I'm not even going to describe the cab experiences. Let's just go straight to the Ubers. Every single Uber driver that drove me while I was in the D.C. area was an ethnic minority. And most of them, all but one, were from these kind of disadvantaged countries, Eritrea, places on the African continent. And what I learned is that the reason why they love driving Uber when they arrive in this country is because it serves two purposes. First of all, you have to pass the driver's test. So they have to be at least reading and speaking some English so they can pass the driver's test and get their driver's license. But then it also, they make small talk with the people that they're driving. Not one of them let me just sit there and look at my phone. They all, do you live here? Or are you just Ubering around town because you don't feel like driving, or are you from out of town? And then we would make small talk, and they were very interesting people, and they asked some interesting questions. And invariably, almost all of them turned the conversation to politics at one point, and boy, were they well informed and interesting to talk to. I mean, so common sense. They're not here because they hate America or because they think they're going to get something for free. The ones that were driving me around were hardworking people, but they're basically sharpening their English skills by speaking with all of these strangers that they drive around, whether they're driving you for 10 minutes or for 40 minutes. Because I did a couple of trips where I was in the car with traffic for like 40 minutes. So what am I saying? I'm saying Bernie Sanders he's a garbage peddler. He doesn't even take the time to dress the garbage up so it looks like the truth. He just sits there and states untruths. It is not good for us to buy into the idea that we need some kind of national minimum income or any of the other garbage he's peddling. The kinds of things that Bernie Sanders advocates for are the kind of things that drive people like those Uber drivers that I rode with out of their home countries and straight to America, because we don't have that stuff going on here. And so, yes, it is difficult. It is kind of wild in some ways where you're like, people have to make it on their own. They might have a hard time making ends meet. It might be difficult. Yeah. I mean, can't we all tell stories of when we were dumb and in our 20s and we made choices and then we ended up having to work 2 jobs to pay off some bill or make our monthly payments, or you bought a car that was too expensive and you ended up having to make that payment until you could sell it, or you just had to keep paying on it and pay it off. And so many other mistakes that you can make in your 20s and your 30s. But when you look back on that, didn't you learn a lot? Don't you know, that's not something I'm interested in doing. You learn from that kind of stuff. Bernie Sanders wants to take all of those learning opportunities away from us, so we'll be dumber than doorknobs, relying on the government for everything, while he's sitting up on, he'll have 6 houses by then. Imagine how wealthy he would be if he had won the nomination and run for the presidency against Donald Trump. He's using the political process to enrich himself. If that weren't the case, why wouldn't he be donating all of the money? Why would he be trading as he can as a senator? He can insider trade legally and make all of that money. Why is he doing that then? If he doesn't believe that money is a resource that you can stack up and pile up and use that wealth to influence and accomplish things, why is he doing it? Why doesn't he just keep just enough money for him and his wife to take care of themselves and get all of the rest of it out of his own hands if he really believes in socialism? He doesn't. That's why. He doesn't believe in it. He thinks it's good for people who don't know any better, people who believe liars, but it's not okay for him. He believes in capitalism. Just check his bank statements, check his bottom line, check his net worth, check how many pieces of real estate he owns. And if he had an opportunity to buy another piece of property and it was financially feasible for him, you better believe he would do it, whether it was an investment or whether it was for his own private use. Why? Because he's a capitalist. Also, he believes in guns because as a sitting senator, he has access to armed security. The Capitol Police, they're armed. So he does believe in gun ownership. His touting of his D- rating from the NRA is just another way of him equivocating and papering over what he truly believes. If he thought that he were under a serious, credible threat from some person, he would access armed security. And he would have that armed security until the threat passed. And if the armed security showed up and said, well, we didn't bring any guns, we just brought tasers because we know how much you hate the Second Amendment and how much you don't like, firearms, he would say, you guys are fired. Send me some armed security here. I'm under threat. I want to be protected. And this is the rub with these liberals. Ask them if they want to go live in Venezuela or Cuba. They'll go vacation there. They'll take pictures for their Instagram, but they don't want to go live there. When they get mad about the election, do they say they're going to move to Mexico? Or do they say they want to move to Canada? Yeah, they don't want to move to Mexico. Have you ever heard a Hollywood person say, if Donald Trump wins, I'm going to move to Guatemala? No. They want to go to Europe. They want to go to a country that is just as developed and has a capitalistic bent as our own, because they understand how this thing works. Even Will Smith admitted some years ago when he heard that the French were toying around with a 95% confiscatory tax on wealthy people. He said, oh, I wouldn't agree with that. Now, Will Smith is someone who is, honestly, his ideology is so far out there, it's hard to describe. Obviously, he's a leftist, but he's the Church of Scientology. But he's someone who obviously believes in keeping the money that he's earned. Fancy that. Imagine that, right? Imagine that. So I just thought it was interesting when I heard Bernie Sanders talking this garbage. I was like, you know what we need to do? We need to we gotta get this on the show and talk about it. So something else I've seen going around just since the shooting last week is it's two things. The vilification of people saying they're praying. And we heard, Representative Scalise talking about how he felt the prayers of the people who were praying for him when he was recovering from being shot out in Alexandria on that football or baseball field. And it's true, you can feel when people are praying for you. I mean, you can. It's just, it's an amazing thing how God allows you to be aware of that and how much it can lift your spirits up when your body is weak and broken and failing you. You're spiritually, you can just be elated riding on those prayers. And so I want to encourage all of us to remember that and to just, we can't say it enough. There's no amount of prayer that is too much. And I love to tell the kids, especially when they were little and they were in public school for elementary school, and they would come home. I said my prayers over my lunch, and some of the kids at my table were like, what are you doing? You're not allowed to do that here. And, I volunteered a lot. So I was like, you can absolutely bow your head and pray. But the good thing about prayer is you can pray with your eyes open. You can thank God for your food. You don't have to have a long prayer. You can say, thank you for this food, Lord, in your head while your eyes are open. You can close your eyes for a moment. Prayer is the one thing no one can stop you from doing. You can pray while you're being tortured. You can pray just before you're going under the anesthesia on the surgery table. No one can stop you from silently uttering a prayer to your Father. And remember what the Bible says about how he can even hear our groans. You can sigh and God understands what you mean in that moment. So I encourage everybody. I've even set a little reminder for myself to try to pray more, to prompt me when I see the little reminder come up on my phone to say a quick prayer. We need to do this. It's for our own good, and it increases our access to the Father, and it draws us closer to him, which then prompts him to draw closer to us, which is amazing when we start to see and feel that happen. I want to talk about the guns and the never-ending debate and the idea that somebody's going to confiscate something. Mullen Labe, just, oh my goodness. So we'll be back with that. And Kamala Harris is back in front of the screen saying silly things. So we'll talk about that as well. Stay there. StacyOnTheRight.com, UrbanFamilyTalk.com.
I come to steal, kill, and to destroy. You belong to me. Your soul, your mind, and your body. You chose death over life. You are mine, forever and ever and ever.
Hell is real. Matthew chapter 25 verse 46 says there will be those who will receive eternal punishment in hell, but the righteous will have eternal life in heaven with our Savior Jesus Christ. Which will you choose? Let's go deeper at urbanfamilytalk.com.
Listen to Stacy on the Right with Stacy Washington on Urban Family Talk. She's sharp.
I mean, did you hear that?
Pointed.
Remember that you're not only a Christian on Sunday.
And insightful.
Deception and lies have been accepted as the norm from the Democrats.
But most of all, she's on the right.
That scripture from the Bible that says the heart of the fool inclines to the left just kept popping into my mind.
Stacy on the Right. Now heard weekday afternoons from 2 to 4 Central on Urban Family Talk.
Some 2,000 years ago, the followers of the crucified Christ learned that he had risen from the grave. They quickly spread the word that Jesus was alive. It's good news that spread from one generation to the next, and now it's our turn. One way to tell this extraordinary news to others is by simply wearing and sharing our colorful He Lives Easter buttons. Get your pack of 10 today at afastore.net.
This is Life Issues with Brad Mattis, president of Life Issues Institute.
Every year, the Gerber Baby Food Company has a contest to find America's cutest baby, and parents hope their baby will receive the honor. This year, it was Lucas Warren. What makes the result extra special is Lucas has Down syndrome. This was no charity selection. Lucas certainly deserves the prize. Looking at his picture, you could scoop him up and plant kisses all over that cute face of his. The selection of Lucas and the publicity it's generated is important. It's another example that babies and individuals with Down syndrome are just like you and me. They are all blessings to those who cross their paths. God delighted in making Lucas. His parents delight in being his mom and dad, and I'm thrilled to welcome him into the human family.
Follow us on Twitter at Life Issues USA and stay informed, more informed than you've ever been.
This is Stacy on the Right on Urban Family Talk.
It's going to sound a bit harsh. As a prosecutor for years in appreciating homicide and being able to talk with a judge about it and a jury about it, I had to look at autopsy photographs. When you see the effect of this extreme violence on a human body, and especially the body of a child, maybe it will shock some people into understanding this cannot be a political issue. We have to be practical. I support the Second Amendment, but we have to have smart gun safety laws. And we cannot tolerate a society and live in a country with any level of pride when our babies are being slaughtered.
So the babies that are being slaughtered, welcome back to the show, everybody, according to Kamala Harris, are the teenagers who were killed in this horrible, horrible, horrible situation. But she doesn't have any problem with babies being slaughtered in the womb. Those aren't actual babies because science and whatnot. Just had to point out the inconsistency there. We all know she's an ideologue and she's got like no business being elected to anything. Yet here we are. So let's go to the phones. We've got a call from Maria from Cleveland. Maria, thank you so much for calling Stacy on the Right.
Hey, Stacy. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I absolutely agree with you on the gun control issue. It's not a gun control problem. It's not a drug problem. It's not a mental health problem. It's a heart problem. You know, if people really want to get down to brass tacks, why aren't we, again, coming against alcohol? Alcohol takes 241 lives per day last year. Whoa. You know, drugs take 175. I know, 175 lives per day. But we want to come against guns, which totaled, 2,000 last year, if I think my data was correct from what I looked at? 2,000 in the entire year. Not that should be a trivial number, but we're not dealing with the right issue. The right issue is the family unit. It's been absolutely decimated in the United States of America, and until we start focusing on our families and, you know, turning the TV off, putting our phones down, dialoguing with our family, and interacting with our neighbors, building relationships in communities, we're going to continue to see this. We have to start taking back our neighborhoods.
Absolutely. And, the reason why, Maria, that's not the conversation right now is because that involves, that's a day-to-day thing. That's something where people are going to say, well, we're not going to see results from that, but we do. It's amazing what kind of results we can see as people, how often we're kind of cold and distant towards each other and we're detached. And just one little kind word a person can melt down. I mean, have you ever seen that where everyone's standing in line and then someone breaks out a checkbook or something and everyone in line you could see everybody's back get straight like, is that a checkbook? And then you see people, they just kind of look over their shoulder like, do you see this? And everyone is now stressed out and has the same mind. How long is this going to take? And then someone, usually it's an older person, will say, oh my gosh, I wonder how old I'll be when this is over. And everyone will laugh and then the tension dissipates. And that is the reality of who we are. So we need to reach out to each other because we need that. We need somebody funny to help us release tension. We need somebody to say, oh my goodness, I didn't realize you were going through that. Let's pray together really quickly. People appreciate that.
Right. And that's what we need more of. I wonder how many people were actually in, this shooter's life. They reported him to the FBI. They recognized he had issues. How many people actually reached out to him to try and help him? How many people? And the same thing we have in the inner cities right now. How many people are actually trying to make a difference in their community? They want to complain, they want to scream, they want to yell, but yet what are you actually doing to make a difference?
I agree. Thank you so much for calling the show, Maria. I totally agree with your comments, and I'm just encouraging people to do more in that area. Just it's not about making people feel bad for not doing anything. It's about saying, as an individual, what can I do to try to help out in the situation? Not just complaining, not just going back and forth with our text messages to friends, kind of saying, oh, that's a horrible thing, or that's a horrible community, or that's a horrible group of people. Okay, well, what can we do? Prayer is the number one thing, but then there's the action. There's taking our hands and our feet and doing something for the situation, whatever it might be, and connecting with our neighbors. This is something that really, honestly, most of us are looking at our schedule and you're scrolling down. You're like, and when exactly do I have time to do that? I don't know. If I could make time or clone myself, I'd be working on those things. I'd also be wealthy because those are things that most people want to do. I don't have the answers for all of it, but I know the answer is not confiscating guns. And so what's awesome is when a friend shoots you some information that's awesome or good or relevant. And that is what's just happened. I got a message from Suzanne Vinker, who I just mentioned a couple of segments ago. She has 2 new pieces up on foxnews.com, and they're about this issue that we've been discussing here on the show. And so I'm so glad she alerted me to these, because I want to go over them in this last segment of the program. We've been talking about the struggle that our children are experiencing, especially our boys here in America, dealing with their school situations, bullying, et cetera, and why so many of them are turning to these mass attacks and going out and killing people. And what is going on? I even saw some people post on my Facebook page, why didn't he kill himself? Why did he go kill a whole bunch of other people? Miss me with he's feeling remorse now. Well, of course he feels remorseful now, but what's going on, and how can we prevent other boys from going through this? So she's writing about the shooting, and in response, there's this guy who Suzanne Vinker says she's never heard of. He's apparently an actor and a comedian, invited a conversation on Twitter, and he started with the following statement. His name's Michael Ian Black. Deeper even than the gun problem is this: boys are broken. Suzanne Vinker agrees that's 100% true. But then she feels like he veered off course in his attempt to have a conversation. And she's upset with the idea that he's attacking masculinity. And I agree with her. So the last thing we need to do is attack masculinity. The shooter, someone who goes in and does a surprise attack on a group of other people who are innocent, who are unarmed, that's not an example of masculinity. That's an example of cowardice, because he knows the school is unarmed. He knows their security procedures. He knows they don't have a single entry policy. He knows that it's a soft target. masculine men don't attack soft targets. They protect innocent people. They attack attackers. They defend innocent people. So Mr. Black, Suzanne Banker writes, Mr. Black is not the first to attack masculinity and suggests it's the root of all evil. Toxic masculinity has become boilerplate language in America. But she is talking about the fact that Mr. Black is correct when he says boys are broken, but they're not broken as a result of being cavemen who haven't evolved as women have. They're broken because they're fatherless. Now, this is a very unpopular statement to make. And I always, whenever I read Suzanne's work, I always applaud the idea that she's a wife and a mom, and she's taken away, you know, she could easily be out shopping all day and having lunch, and instead she chooses to speak into the culture in this way, truthfully, which makes her a target for a lot of hate and derision. Here's the quote from her that I want you to take away from this. The solution to male violence is not to spout off drivel about the evils of masculinity. Masculinity channeled well is the reason assistant football coach Aaron Feist died this week. Feist shielded students from bullets by pushing them inside a classroom. He took the bullets on their behalf. Broken homes or homes without a physically and emotionally present mother and father are the cause of most of society's ills. Unstable homes produce unstable children, writes Peter Hassan at The Federalist. She quotes him where he talks about CNN's list of the 27 deadliest mass shootings in U.S. history. 7 of those shootings were committed by young males since 2005. Of the 7, only one, the Virginia Tech shooter Sung Hyu Cho, was raised by his biological father throughout his childhood. So the problem that we have here is absent fathers. Suzanne goes on, America's boys are in serious trouble. As Warren Farrell's new book, The Boy Crisis, explains, boys are experiencing a crisis of education, mental health, as in the case of Nicholas Cruz, and a crisis of purpose. At the root of it all is fatherlessness. There's a direct correlation between boys who grow up with absent fathers and boys who drop out of school, who drink, who do drugs, who become delinquent, and who wind up in prison. And what's so funny about this is that a lot of suburban moms, you know, I used to be this mom. My prayer life wasn't as strong back then. I used to worry incessantly when we had our son that somehow he would grow up to be in one of those situations. And as he grew and, you know, went into toddlerhood, and we were in couples ministry at our church, and I would talk to other moms. I'm like, how do you do this? How do you do that? And they're like, well, why are you so concerned about preventing him from becoming this or doing this or that? Be concerned with raising him and stepping back enough so your husband can take part in that free and unfettered. And I heard that over and over and over again. And it's the truth. An overbearing mom especially for her son, is a serious source of problems for that young man. But even more serious than a mom who's overbearing, but the husband is the biological father and he's in the home, is a young man growing up in a home where his biological father is not there. And so people who say that, well, women can raise kids on their own. Yeah. And I can walk outside with no jacket and walk 5 or 10 or 20 miles if I need to. If I had to do it, I absolutely could. But is that the preferred state for me? To walk outside in 30-degree weather with no jacket, no hat, no gloves, no scarf, and walk for 20 miles? No, it isn't. So the fact that the human being can sustain something or withstand it or tolerate it doesn't make it the desired way of living. Our goal should be to stop school shootings, but above that, it should be to encourage and support fatherhood. Because a lot of these problems that we're seeing, promiscuity among girls, studies show that girls who have an active and involved father in the home, their biological father, are much less likely to do drugs, have sex, drink alcohol, drop out of school, earn poor grades, even skipping school. Girls whose dad lives right there in the home. Isn't it amazing what just having the father of the children present in the home can do? So many people say, well, what if he's not that great? Are you great? I mean, can you just give me a break with this whole idea that if a man is to be present, he has to be perfect? All of us are a work in progress. But if you've had the child and he helped you make the child, the two of you need to be there to raise that child. Saying that, extremely unpopular. So she says also there's a direct correlation between boys who grow up with absent fathers and those who kill their classmates. So we blame guns, violence in the media, violence in video games, poor family values. But Farrell noted in 2013 after the Newtown, Connecticut shooting, our daughters live in the same homes with the same access to the same guns, video games, and media. They're raised with the same family values. The daughters aren't killing, the sons are. So I've already put this up on Stacy on the Right Show on Facebook. And I just want to mention to people, if you're listening to the show and you're the kind of person who says, well, I just still think that Australia is safer and England is safer, and what we need to do is, we need to confiscate the guns, and I think it can be done. I encourage you to read Charles C.W. Cook over at National Review. He wrote a piece that I've read most of it on the air a couple of times in the course of this program from the weekend to weekday, Stacy on the Right Show. And I have to tell you, you want to see a civil war? You want to see another civil war jump off? Get the National Guard or some. That's why the Democrats don't do it. Remember, the Democrats have been in charge before, where they had the presidency and a veto-proof majority in Congress, and they could have passed gun confiscation legislation, and they didn't, because it is an untenable idea. Not only would you not get the guns from the criminals, but you wouldn't get the guns from the law-abiding citizens either. So this isn't about guns. And I know it's, well, I remember the NRA. She's a gun owner. Well, that's all no, it's not all I care about. In fact, guns are not even my primary concern here. My concern is that if people don't start talking about the truth, if we still over and over and over again, after every one of these shootings, we sit around and talk about gun confiscation, which is never going to happen. That's time that's wasted that could have been spent discussing the fact that this country, we need a savior. And if you're practicing some other religion besides Christianity, good for you. But I'm talking about the Christian, Judeo-Christian moorings that this country was built upon, which don't require anyone to be a Christian, but at the time most were. That's what we have to return to. And it's not impossible. With God, all things are possible. If God can speak the universe into existence with the power of his mouth, he can certainly revive America. We need to be talking about how to get more fathers back into the homes and more attention paid to these young men because they're desperate. School shootings are a cry for help from our children, America's children, who we are failing on massive scale. So that's the show for today. I'll be back with you tomorrow with more Stacy on the Right here on Urban Family Talk and American Family Radio, and now America's Voice TV. We'll be back with more. Have a great night.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast do not necessarily reflect